Hey everyone, welcome to another live stream with myself, Abdul Chauhan, Vice President of Learning at Shobi. And I am absolutely honored that today we have Michael Fullan with us. Many of you that are educators will have grown up on a diet of Michael's books and thoughts and ideas. I certainly did. My wife's a teacher. We've kind of talked and discussed a lot about Michael's work as well. So, Michael, absolutely wonderful to have you with us for this live stream.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This is really the time to talk about it. We're just trying to recover, as you know, everybody is from COVID, and there's a lot of, I guess I'll say, pent up ideas, good and bad. But
Yeah.
there's going to be an unleashing of these once people catch their breath. So this discussion is timely for the next couple of years.
Wonderful. So we'll kind of explore a few different areas, some of your thoughts and ideas and so on as well. But just in case there are people out there that don't know who Michael is, so Michael Fullan is the Global Leadership Director for New Pedagogies for Deep Learning. And I believe that I can actually share the link for that here as well. So if you've not seen that, absolutely get yourself over, have a look at that. He's also the former Dean of the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, and he's currently based in Toronto as well, amongst lots of other publications and books and so on. So, Michael, kind of getting into it, one of the things I mentioned this like earlier on, just before we kind of went live. There's a lot of people that are aware of your work and they are aware of your thoughts with respect to drivers for change. Yeah. And you've kind of talked about wrong drivers and right drivers, but there was one particular word in there that really kind of made me put the book down and kind of stop and really think and reflect. And you used the word bloodless. Yeah.
Yep.
And I've never heard that before, that word used before in education. So tell us a little bit, certainly about the drivers, but like, what do you mean by that? And like the kind of like the origin of the drivers and so on.
Yeah. I'm the work we do is always in partnerships with the field, with practitioners all the time. So I get stimulated on this. I guess I'll say the specific things, the up close things. And although it sounds like sometimes like theory, it's really me capturing what's happening in practice, for better or for worse. And so about 10 years ago, I did a paper called "The Wrong Drivers," and that actually caught a lot of attention. But it was about what not to do, standardized test. Endless use of technology, and things like that. So I wrote a more serious report about 6 months ago on the right drivers for system change. So that's what you're referring to. You can get it on my website, michaelfullan.ca. So it's there in that. And what I saw was the standardized test and academic obsession, and that's the word I want to use, had gone wild, and it's became kind of an end in itself. It's only serving a small percentage of the population. And then when I looked at what was driving that, and if you just ask yourself the question, if people, let's say, get good grades and go to a good university, are they better at life as a result of that? Or are they just kind of too narrowly pursuing something? So without question, when I looked at the drivers, and the wrong drivers were academic obsession, too much reliance on machines or the technology, or trying to find the answer there in the wrong way. The growing inequality that represented the way that money was distributed, and also ad hoc policy. And I said, when you look at those four drivers that kind of rule a lot of the day, they're bloodless. We've lost humanity. And so now we can talk a bit about the right drivers in a few moments, but you go to the right drivers, you have to recapture humanity, which ironically for education has been lost in the shuffle. So the big problem with education is the massive reduction on the presence of people, who's who, and well-being, not just well-being, but how do you flourish in a complex society as a learner? So I wanted to nail it, and the word bloodless is better, it jumps out at you, obviously, and it is bloodless. The people are not treated as people anymore. They're treated as gadgets.
Yeah, absolutely, really, really powerful stuff. I mean, it's you've got to kind of sit absorb this and kind of really think about this. So I think that's kind of really powerful. And there's a quote that I've used in the past as well. I've always said that quite often in education, we've become really good at doing the wrong things really well.
Yeah.
You know,
True.
you
True.
know. And the thing is, it kind of gets repeated. You just see everybody else kind of doing the same thing as well, and kind of stopping, thinking, reflecting, and applying that humanized approach is certainly something that is needed. Okay, so kind of moving on to your kind of new pedagogies for deep learning, right? I'm really interested to know, like, for somebody that hasn't discovered that, what is different about that approach and the pedagogies that you're talking about compared to typically, what governments are pushing, what departments for education want teachers to do in terms of teaching and so on? What is the difference between the two?
Well, what to start with, it's kind of it's best to start with the status quo, and we can go back to December 2019, which was pre-COVID, but it was the same then, and it's the same has been the same now, which is that the school system has become increasingly irrelevant for students year after year after year for the last 40 years. And so we know the data from US, from England, from Australia, et cetera, it shows that as students go up the grade levels, by the time they get to year 11, there's only about 20% of students who find it relevant. And so some of us worked in this area, we call it the yawning gap between what students should want and what they're actually getting. And that's why they've tuned out, including students who could be very good at learning. It's just so repetitive and so irrelevant. So just to be very clear, and some people have called this the grammar of school. The grammar of school, the old grammar, somehow that started in 1850 or 1880, it stayed the same with minor modifications, and we've lost students in the shuffle, and we've lost good teachers in the shuffle. So that's the negative way of putting it. So we started 6 years ago to say, well, there's some people who have the same conclusion, but it's one thing to criticize it. What does it look like if you want it to be substantial? And so this led to deep learning. We've written 2 books on it. One is called Deep Learning, Engage the World, Change the World. And the other one is called Dive into Deep Learning to get the tools. So essentially what it is and what's different is that instead of being obsessed with narrow academic performance, you step back and you define it more fundamentally as, in our case, the 6 global competencies. So character, citizenship, collaboration, communication, creativity, critical thinking. These are all within the learning domain. It certainly goes deeper on the cognitive element, but it also introduced what people call social economic SEL. So that's now well-being, let's call it. So well-being and learning now are pursued. So one difference is the focus on different outcomes, which ironically or paradoxically ends up students do better on literacy and numeracy than they do if you just directly do that and hound them about it. So we've got that now 6 competencies. The other major change is pedagogy, the way that's learning. So there's a radical change in the increased partnership with students, individually and collectively. Students as change makers, students more initiating in their learning, students working in groups, and then teachers enabling that to be part of it. So the partnership is very strong. And I think when you see those 2 things, if you change the goals and you change the pedagogy, then you start to look at, okay, what are the outcomes here? And there are a number of places, including ourselves, who are developing what we call and other people call new metrics to assess the learning outcomes. And they tend to be around the competencies. There's a group in Australia at the University of Melbourne, Sandra Milligan is the professor, and they're developing new metrics to replace the dominance of NAPLAN, which is the academic literacy and numeracy assessment in Australia, replace it with that, still have obviously literacy and numeracy, but to have it superimposed around the greater competencies that people need to be effective in life. So big changes in the goals, the purpose, big changes in the nature of pedagogy, and then correspondingly big changes in the kind of leadership and support structure at, let's say, the LEA level or the policy level.
So okay, so here's a big stone in the pond kind of thing, causing ripples. Would you say that the rate determining step for that to be adopted by countries' government is the current status of high stakes exams? Because like a lot of schools that I kind of visit, it's exam season here in the UK at the moment. There's pretty much all the focus and drive is towards getting kids past those exams, and the numbers and the weighting, and what's the percentage pass rate of the school and how many kids got past that score and so on. The moment those kids leave that school, it's kind of like it's a historical thing. It's something on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
It kind of then didn't really help them for the future and so on. So and what you're saying is actually kind of almost a completely different approach to the way in which we measure what learning looks like and what a whole human well-being kind of development looks like from all the 6 C's and so on. So high stakes exams, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'll say it dramatically. It's the worst thing that's happened. High stakes exam are the worst things that happen to learning and education, full stop. But to be a little more, I guess, fair, I could say back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when there was rapid expansion and the need for students to be basically educated, there was a role to have that as a focus, build that up, get more graduation, get more students. But along the way, it became, I use the word in the driver's report, academic obsession. And I mean obsession. And when you have an obsession, what do? You overdose, right? You get addicted. It gets disturbed. And then in the meantime, the inequality of society has increased financially and in all aspects of life. So it's not even serving the ones that do well. One of the books called them the wounded winners. They did win, but they weren't fit for life. They got grades. So the whole thing is wrong now in 2022, and it has been wrong for at least 10 years. It's just wrong. It's got to be replaced by something, though. It can't be just criticizing this. And this is why we've been developing the deep learning. It's the replacement. It encompasses good learning about literacy and numeracy, high school graduation. But if you obsess with something, if you try to hound people into doing it, it almost always fails. And these days, people are more likely to not be pushed around by policies and by other things. So it's just bad all over. We've got to get something that attracts people to do things that will be good for themselves and good for civilization.
Absolutely. Completely agree with you there. Wounded winners, not heard that term before. Fantastic. Okay, so just kind of moving on with the conversation. I've kind of first really started to get into your work back in the day when, as a part of the senior leadership team, we did a project in my local hometown with technology and with students, and we gave out devices and all that kind of stuff with technology and so on. But what we were really looking for is what difference does it actually make to learning, and what does it allow us to do that we weren't able to do in the past? And you've been quite prominent and vocal about technology and its impact on pedagogy and so on. What are your thoughts now? We're 2022, we've been through COVID, we've kind of seen pretty much the direction of travel with technology. What are your thoughts with respect to the impact of technology in education, the good, the bad, the ugly, if you want?
That's a big question, Abdul.
It is.
We got an hour or what? Yeah. So my thoughts on when we were first looking at this in 2010 was, okay, there's technology, there's pedagogy, and there's systems working here. And we don't want that technology will never be a good driver. It can be an accelerator, but the driver has to be pedagogy. So that sort of set the broad stage. But my thoughts right now are what the pandemic did. It actually exposed the weakness of the use of technology. When people were forced to use technology, they didn't know how to do it. All that virtual stuff, they were floundering. So somehow technology was there, but it wasn't working anyways. And when it was forced to be part of the solution, it was worse because the people were doing the wrong things, etc. So I think that at the end of the day, these days, today, this now gives us an opportunity to place technology very well to serve what we're talking about. And we actually have an interesting example that we've been involved in. The country of Uruguay in South America, they started in 2004, 2006 with a one computer per student in the country. They wanted to jump into the future in 2005 or so. And then they got computers for everyone. It's a small country, but it's sizable enough. And then they had these computers, not fancy ones, but one per person, so to speak. Yeah. And they asked me to evaluate it. And we evaluated it in 2010, 2011, and said, you've got the technology started, but you don't have the learning. You're not paying attention to that. And the system isn't geared for it. So now, and I want to give a plug for them because I just did an interview with their television crew. They're celebrating their 15th anniversary from founding to the present day. And they've been enormously successful because they took technology. They said it's not sufficient. We're going to add innovation around pedagogy. They created an innovative unit to support it. As teachers and students innovated in the use of technology, and we've got brilliant, you can see some of the videos on our website that you showed earlier for deep learning. And they began then to build local communities. And so they put together the three things: technology to start with, now new pedagogy of learning, and then the third one is getting the systems to support it. So that's a very poor country, and they didn't know anything about this when they started, and they've leapt ahead of most other countries around the quantitative and qualitative use of this. So my point about this is to realize technology has the role. It's being forced on it. Society has done that, but it takes a sophistication to figure out what is the relationship between technology and deep learning. That's the part that you have to get right. And in our model, we have the technology, we have the deep learning, the 6 C's, and then we have new pedagogy that alters the role of students and teachers, gets more into the creation of this, integrates well-being and academics, and begins to flourish. You can see it, and that's the shift we have to make now. And COVID has forced that issue, but so it has to be dealt with. The problem right now is people are tired and burnt out for right now, but when they recover a little bit, when they catch their breath, when they have to do something, don't go back to the old way. Take this newer way, which is happier, more productive, uses less energy, gets better results.
That's kind of quite meaningful in many ways, and it's interesting to see that. It's certainly my experience that even where governments or actually organizations have started with technology, they've kind of found a path or a way to kind of see the impact of technology on pedagogy. Like, what is it allowing them to do that they couldn't do before? Where are the time savings? Where are the cost savings? The kind of operational things, but pedagogically as well. I know we started working with schools with verbal feedback, so annotating documents with voice. And for me, that was where the bloodless term, sorry to come back to that again, but it kind of came in because it was like humanized technology, right? It allowed you to communicate with another student with my voice, my emotion, and for them to respond back in exactly the same way as well, which was kind of quite a powerful thing. And then, being able to develop that into something a lot more meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know what you did in Bolton and the particulars, but I'm going to venture to say you were able to do innovative things despite the government. And so there's 2 points there. One is you don't need the government to do a lot of these things. And secondly, you can have a lot of leeway if you have the good idea and you push it locally and develop the support for it. But in the case in England, I think, and it's not just to pick on that country, but over the last 50 years, different ministers of education have done different things to the system. And so at the end of the day, you get, I've been done to, I've been done to, I've been done to. You don't have anything left of the, but the shreds of that. So we want to reverse that now. And any government that comes in, its job is to cultivate the innovations like Uruguay did, pull it out and support it, leverage it, but don't think you can impose it. We say that what we want is imposition. What we want is specificity without imposition. Specificity without imposition. If you try to impose it, people back off. If you leave everything alone, a few get it done, and most don't. So if you get this relationship now that we're working on, is we're not going to impose anything on anybody, but we are going to work with them to create what is working, and to have it have specificity and clarity, and to have people want it because it works, and we're not twisting their arm to do it. We're enabling them to do it. So this could be the next 5 years, a really breakthrough of the kind we've needed for 150 years.
I hope so. I hope so. So, Michael, are there examples of where organizations, governments, countries are actually beginning to kind of dip into the deep learning model? Beginning to implement that, seeing the impact, and seeing the impact that deep learning, the new pedagogy is kind of having on their organization?
At the country level, I would say no, that except for Uruguay. Uruguay is also it's a different kind of system, but that's very primitive system and has been successful countrywide because they have created an innovative unit at the government level. It's worked jointly with the Ministry of Education, and they've been able to do it. So, but you can't, in fact, you can't imitate any one model because each context is different. But we know it can be done because they did it. Secondly, we know of school districts that have done it because we work, the Ottawa Catholic District, for example, 84 schools. We, for the last 6 years in Ottawa, Ontario, has been an enormous success. Absolutely. All the students, all the 83 schools, because they did it by cultivating the existence of it. I think some of the other bigger ones, there's a kind of, at the OECD level, where they have the PISA results that are too narrow. They've been kind of, with some countries, have been shaking up what's the role of PISA, that these old tests are not really the right ones. We've got to move to a better deep learning version of that. And so I'm pretty confident that there are 2 or 3 countries, maybe Singapore, although I tend to think of it as not very typical, even though they do a lot of good things. But Scotland's doing some good things now, I think, and trying to bring this together. So I think there's a kind of a bubbling of it now that hasn't really taken hold. But I'm going to say that the next 5 years are going to be way more evident of this work that we're talking about than the past 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I've speaking to educators in Scotland. We've been quite active over there, working with school leaders and having conversations with them. And certainly your work does resonate over there with school leaders, and looking at that approach and embedding it in terms of looking beyond exam results and just kind of preparing for exams. And that's something that is definitely coming through. Also in the Nordics as well. I mean, I've traveled to Sweden quite a lot, and quite often it was probably a week after you had been or something, or there's a week where you're coming and I was there, and there's a degree of excitement with a lot of kind of school leaders looking for that thing that is not done to them, but they are kind of wanting to understand. It makes logical sense to them. It connects with their passion for education, and then it's something that they want to apply. And I think there's a richness in that compared to a thou shall approach, where it's a document, a white paper that lands on your table, and you have to do some things.
It's a bit tricky, although, Abdul, I would say it this way, because I know Sweden a certain amount. They went through, the last 10 years where there was a lot of autonomy at the local level. So I want to think about 3 models. There's the imposed model, which doesn't work. And then I'm going to say about Sweden, the laissez-faire model also doesn't work, where everybody sort of does their own thing. And then you get aggressive, positioning and trying to serve yourself, but not having any sense of broader community or society. So that it's well known, because it's been documented, that Sweden has lost an enormous amount of ground in the last 10 years because they've been too random and not pulling together the coalitions that needed to be. So in between the too tight and the too loose is the just right. and they're just right as our deep learning or versions of it. So I think people realize that now, that if they've experienced the looseness where people floundered and didn't help each other, if they've experienced that, they know that that's not the right way. All of us have at one time experienced the imposition. We know that that's not the case. So there's got to be a third way, and this third or whatever way is going to be uh, support for organized groups of people and networks of things to do really good things and pull it out. And I think in England, one of the ones I'm familiar with is the Kyra Alliance, and I don't. There's a huge number of schools in it, and
Yeah,
they have been coordinating and developing effectively by having schools learn from each other in increasingly sizable networks, laterally learning from each other and pulling that together. That's got potential, that model.
yeah, and there's more and more like we call them multi-academy trusts here.
Yeah.
Part of that shift away from local council, one of the benefits that a lot of trusts are kind of seeing is that the ability to kind of draw strength from all your team players that you have across multiple schools and being able to kind of share that. So I'd say collaborative, but probably a bit more than collaborative, because it's people sharing good ideas, best practice, being able to kind of air their thoughts, having other people to communicate with that have the same kind of issues or difficulties or challenges as you as well. And that kind of community is something that is seen as kind of quite a powerful thing, and there is a shift here in the UK towards.
Yeah, and I think it needs. I haven't been to the UK for a while, but because of COVID and because although things weren't like exciting enough to be there, but now I do want to say the trust in their clusters. Single clusters have been successful, but they've also been divisive because it's scattered all over. And when I meet with some of the trusts now, and they're very much open to doing this, I want to say, how do you use your interaction with each other to make for a better overall system, not for a better part for just your patch of the country, but for bigger than that. And so I think the system change, if I want to use that term, the next phase for a lot of us, and I would say that for England, is system change has to be this coalescing of the academies phenomenon, so that it has a bigger presence, a more system presence, and not just a local presence with a set of schools, but going beyond that. And when I challenge them, I say, okay, you've been successful to a point. How do you now shift your role so you're making a contribution to system change? How do you do that? Do still what you're doing, but be conscious that you're going to be part of changing the system. And I can tell you there's a lot of instant interest in wanting to do that. They just need to be enabled.
It's I suppose, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's that move from fragmentation to systemness, right?
Yeah.
Where people are working in isolation as your own organization, but actually, there's a greater good that can be achieved through that kind of connectivity.
There is, and what we're trying to do is enable the students, teachers, and others to want to make a contribution to systemness. We're not trying to get the government to create systemness. We're trying to get the grassroots and the middle roots to want to, and they do want to do it. They just want more. They want to be enabled more to it. So it's that potential, I think, is the next phase of innovation, is to pull those experiences out where people say, I want to contribute to a better system overall. I'll do my part here, but I'll participate with others in making it more prominent in a widespread basis.
Yeah, I was at an event just a few weeks ago where it was the CEOs of lots of these trusts together, one room, and it was regional, so it was in the northern part of England, and it was chaired by a gentleman called John Murphy, who's the CEO of Oasis Academies Trust, and it was really powerful. The conversation was very much about systemness rather than fragmentation. And one of the challenges that he threw down was, how can we work together? What is it that we can do to kind of create change? And it was everything from the diversity, representing different people in our organizations. How do we kind of create change sustainably, consistently, and in a connected way, where we've all subscribed to that belief to make that happen. And I think you're right. Rather than it coming from a government, which is a decree, thou shalt, and you might be inspected on it, and so on, the way you do something with that kind of approach is very different when a person has heart and mind and belief in terms of the way in which they kind of want to interact. And
I think just to think about this in a big way, it started with the LEAs, and there's still the fragmentation, and that was back then. When the trust came along, it gave people new satisfaction because they have freedom, they're working with colleagues. Now what you're saying is that the trust are interested in the next layer upward of coordination. Absolutely. And that's where there's an appetite to do that. And that's where, if it's enabled, it could pay off, because people have experienced going from isolation to connection, but now they can go from connection to systemness. They can taste it. And I think it's got a good possibility if it's orchestrated in the right way.
Absolutely. Michael, like 30 minutes have just kind of flown by. I could carry on talking to you for another hour or two. No problem at all. Thank you so much for taking time out to kind of join us. I'm sure educators all over the world will be kind of watching this and listening to this as well. And thank you so much for all your contributions to education. I speak on my part and on behalf of many, many educators that have learned so much from you and from your thoughts, and continue to do so as well. So thank you so much.
Okay, thanks for opening the door. We hope a lot of people will walk in.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.